I mean, I got like not death threats from comics, but I got threats to like be beaten up. I got like it was insane.
My guest today is comedian Josh Howie. In addition to being the writer and star of the BBC Radio 4 sitcom Josh Howie's Losing It, he also plays Simon in the Netflix show Hapless and regularly appears on GB News' Headliners, a programme that takes a comedic look at news and current affairs. Josh also writes for the Jewish Chronicle and uses his social media platform to highlight anti-Semitism. Josh, thanks so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for asking me. What an honor.
It's a real privilege to have you on. Now, look, some of our listeners that may not know, we spoke a few years ago. At the time, I was following quite a few comedians on social media, and I saw that you were one of the only ones speaking out about anti-Semitism. And at this time, it was in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. And I reached out to you essentially to say thank you. Because I found that you speaking out made it easier for me to speak out, and you've sent me a very nice message in response. Rather than telling me to go away, you were like, yeah, no worries. What made you want to speak out, and did you find it hard at the time?
I found it very hard, and actually I remember getting your message, and it was really encouraging because at that point, it was a pretty low point. I felt like I'd lost a lot of friends, and I was just a bit worn down. So getting your message out of the blue was it felt like there was some purpose to it, like someone was seeing this stuff, because you can feel a little bit like I have a mini platform. There are people with a lot more followers than me. And I probably actually lost about half of my followers. I had about 8,000 followers, and I probably lost about half of them, about 4,000 or so, from when I started talking about anti-Semitism. It was really tough, and you never knew who was seeing it, and that was always people say, oh, what's the point of this? Or certainly, what was the point? And certainly at that time, where it feels like now there are more allies, people are more aware, and people are braver, which is amazing. But certainly 4 years ago, it felt like it was there was a core group of people who were speaking out on this stuff, and we were just so heavily outnumbered. I mean, that was the thing, and it's not that those anti-Semites have gone anywhere. They're in some way, the hardcore group of them are as emboldened as ever, like they're doubling, tripling, quadrupling down. But there definitely are less of them who are as verbal as they were. At the time when I joined Twitter in 2009 or whenever it was almost like I was using Twitter as a notepad for like stuff that happened to me. And then every so often I'd go through it, and sometimes a tweet would sort of take off and you go, oh wow, that's that's interesting. And sometimes it didn't, but you used it as a kind of as a sounding board. And then as the Corbyn thing, so I didn't use it for politics in any way, but just it started to creep in. And I guess actually one of the first people that I started seeing stuff from was Lee Kern, who's also sort of did a bit of stand up. So I followed him. So I started seeing some stuff about this, and also the Israel. Oh God, what's the name? I haven't seen it for ages, actually. What's it? Do you know what I'm talking about? You must know.
Is it Joseph Cohen?
Yeah, Joseph. Yeah. So his stuff as well, and his interview with. And then it does become a little bit of a sort of a black hole where you're sucked in, like, and then you start following one or two more, and so it just got more and more apparent how. Initially I was more on the periphery, and you're seeing the stuff going on, but I guess at some point there is a need. I think the other thing that it's not cowardice necessarily that keeps people out of the game in that way. It's knowledge, and you really have to know your stuff to fight this. You have to know your history about Israel. You have to know all the players in terms of what was going on with the Labour. You have to understand very concisely why things are be able to explain Corbyn's anti-Semitism or other people's anti-Semitism, the crossover between anti-Zionism and anti. So you have to really know this stuff, and that takes a bit of time in and of itself. But it just there was, I think the low point was that more, it was like 2018, 17, 18. There was a period where, now Corbynites like to say that, the press were out to get Corbyn and whatever. And I'm sure the right-wing press didn't like Corbyn, but there was a time, believe it or not, they won't acknowledge, where the press just weren't interested in the anti-Semitism that was going on the left at all. And it was only Jews who were pretty much, apart from one or two other people, who were retweeting this or tweeting about it or talking about it. And it was a very core group of maybe 50 people fighting literally thousands of Corbynites. And that's where and then one article led to another. But there was a good year or two, maybe even more, where it just was like shouting into the void. And that was a really hard point. So, and then when the press did start covering it, because they weren't as they didn't know, and they would also, or certainly BBC, they would always have to like both sides it, or they wouldn't really even know some of the madness. And you're like, why couldn't you have just, not even me, just spoken to the people who really know their stuff here to see? It was really frustrating, but more and more of this stuff did, and I'm like a traditional lefty, so I was like reading The Guardian, and you're reading their take on these things, and you're like, how are you getting to that from that? Like, but it just because, and this is the other thing, is that again, Corbynites want to sort of blame right-wing press, or just that, my God, Corbyn was a threat to system. The only reason was that it did break through was ultimately because there was just so much of it. Like people, Corbynites like to go, it's a smear campaign. It's like the amount of stuff that was actually held back from going out into the press. And it was just, there was so much stuff about Corbyn, about what the Labour headquarters were doing, about the Labour supporters, that it was just like that at the end, it just broke through a dam. It wasn't that the press was really going out and really trying to, point is, when they started looking, it was very easy to find that stuff. The hard bit was they just weren't looking. They didn't know what the look. They didn't understand the issues. So it did get easier at that point, I guess. But it was a really lonely couple of years, and then the 2019 election was really hard, because then I took the fight onto Facebook, and there was a difference in Twitter, and I'd have these big long arguments on Twitter, and you really didn't know if anybody was seeing it, but you just felt like you just had to put the stuff out there and put the facts out there. Had to be some counter narrative. There would be like and even now, like about when it's about anti-Semitism, there'll be like 50,000 likes for some like insane lie, like Kanye West thing, and then you'll read underneath it, and there'll be like 3 likes for the truth, or for whatever it is. But you just have to feel that you are putting the other side out there, and someone is fighting against this stuff. But the 2019 was really tough, because as opposed to it being online on Twitter, you were fighting a lot of anonymous people. But when it was friends or associates, and I had a couple of thousand sort of Facebook friends, but people in the comedy industry, that was really, really tough. There's people I'd known for sometimes decades, and some of the stuff that they were coming out with, and you see friends linking to blogs that like have also printed stuff like on Holocaust denial or whatever it is, and you're just like, it was, and famous people as well. Like, I'm a comic, I'm not particularly, I'm known by a few people, but I mean, I do know a lot of famous people because we started together. And so to see the rhetoric that was coming out of them was really hard, and challenge it. And some people it worked, and did, and I'd say, look, I'd message them and say, look, check this out, you should read this, whatever. And some people did and changed their tune, but there was a real sense of that they just really bought into this whole thing, that it was like a conspiracy, that Israel and controlled the press and wanted to stop Corbyn getting to power and all this stuff, or Jews were rich and didn't want to pay taxes. I mean, that really was the narrative that was out there. It was mental, because it was what start. And if we could go back in time, if Corbyn had truly acknowledged the problem of left anti-Semitism on the left, and amongst his people he had previously supported, or still supported, really. If the left had acknowledged it, that was like the initial problem. It was just this, like, they couldn't accept that they actually were hypocrites, that weren't these like pure anti-racists. Everything had to be, the people who've like doubled and tripled down since, and including Corbyn, it's because their worldview is so blinkered as to their purity that that funnily enough, and this is what happened with the whole movement, really, or to a degree, was the only way was to either accept some culpability, or accept that there were people, that the fellow travelers on the left who were racist, Holocaust deniers, or whatever, or double down and go, it's all a lie, I'm pure, everyone I know is pure, I've never met a non-racist, I'm non-racist, and I've never met a racist, I'm non-racist, and all my friends are perfect. And the only explanation for all of this evidence is because it's all fake, it's all conspiracy, Jews run the world, Jews are trying to not pay tax, Jews are rich, Jews are the ones in power. So it becomes anti-Semitic rather than just kind of being honest. And that was the thing. And it's so mad that it sort of got to that point, but that's what it all, that I saw. That's what I see, the bigger picture, it's like starting from a core group of genuine anti-Semites, and then people getting into it, and rather than engaging with those anti-Semites or that problematic stuff, it became like they actually doubled down and almost became anti-Semitic. It wasn't that anti-Semitism wasn't there within at some level, but at least it was somewhat hidden, and they became emboldened.
I want to go back to something you said. You mentioned the comedy industry. And I think that in the arts, there is often a blind spot when it comes particularly to anti-Semitism on the left. And we've seen it time and time again in the theatre. The most recent example, probably Herschel Fink. And I think that comedy is not too dissimilar. We also know that, a former podcast guest, comedian and author David Baddiel showed in his book, Jews Don't Count, anti-Semitism is often an overlooked or even justified form of racism among those on the left who claim to be against all forms of racism. Is this a trend that you have observed among comedians or people in the comedy industry?
Oh yeah, I mean, you say a blind spot. It's bigger than a spot. It's just blind, and it's utter hypocrisy. See, I don't. It's not that. It's a weird thing to say, but look, anti-Semitism is out there, and people are raised, and in a certain way, but also the perniciousness of different types of racism within, and certainly within the Western society, about how the jokes are just like seemingly come from nowhere, in terms of Jews being stingy, in terms of tropes, in terms of world power, all that stuff. But it's so sort of deep and so embedded that arguably it's a miracle if someone comes to maturity, a non-Jewish person, without having it within you, to the point where I had it, arguably, and a lot of Jews have those stereotypes within, because if you're raised not in the Jewish community, I went to I went to a public school. I had a very privileged life, but I went to public school. There were some Jewish people there, but that stuff was out in the ether there, even there, about Jews being stingy, about control, about all the Jewish power, all that stuff. It's there. And so, because I wasn't raised in the Jewish community, you carry that with you to a degree, to the point where when I started being part of the community, now my kids go to Jewish schools. I'm a member of my shul, and writing for the JC, whatever it is. I'm now an embedded part of the community, and through that process, there was a part of me going, wait a minute, will I be taken aside to will the truth be revealed to me or whatever, will they go, yeah, you know what, all that stuff there, maybe they've exaggerated, but here's the room of everybody controlling the world. Here's the thing. And never more so during the Twitter stuff, because what amazed me, and I wrote this once in a column for the JC, but at the time it's like there was nothing that proved how little power Jews actually had or have than in that first few years of fighting this stuff online, because it was like and even now, like just that the outright anti-Semitism that's not banned on Twitter, but it was even more so when this stuff wasn't called attention to. So and the idea that there was like lots of people, and part of me was like, why can't Israel? I thought Israel would have these thousands of people doing stuff, or or controlling, or somehow close, whatever it was. And you go, and then it dawns on you, and then you meet up for a pint with a couple, and you're like, damn, this is just us. Like, this is insane. It's just 20 sort of middle-class Jews in North London who are the backbone of this thing, It's like, that's terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. So that's been an eye opener. Amongst comics, it more know stuff now, but it was much worse. And there are big name comics, and there are people who just wrote some outrageous stuff, never been cancelled for it, never acknowledged it, apologized for it. Again, it's the hypocrisy of it, where, as David, I believe with first name basis, I could say David Bedilta, in his book, like he summed it up. I mean, the phrasing of it is so genius of it, because it is the Jews that count. It's not that racism doesn't exist and bigotry doesn't exist. You could argue. I did anthropology at university. There's a, human. We're tribal. It's a very hard thing to truly banish from society, when so much of our culture is based on difference, or so. But it's just the fact that comedians in particular are so overwhelmingly on the left. Racism is a bad thing, and it's held up so. And so when you see the effort that goes to people going to be allies to other ethnicities, but also to when people transgress that, to see the ramifications for that, yet to see people say just outright, racism against Jews, and to have no blowback, no support from any other comedians or whatever. And it's not like, I'm not a believer in this like cancel culture and stuff. People make mistakes. People say stupid stuff. I've said stupid stuff for sure. But the idea that it's not challenged is the issue. There was a comic. He's not a household name, but he wrote some just grade 1 anti-Semitism about how there was all a conspiracy with the Labour Party, and how he's like, they just want to do it because they want to make them keep their money, and it's all whatever. And all the comics knew about it. It sort of went, no, this guy's still gigging, still gigging, still all the Jews got, there's about 10 Jewish comics, at the circuit level, all confronted him, very public thing. The guy didn't lose any work. No promoters are like, you know what, this needs to be challenged, or he needs to go away and reappraise his thought process or anything like that. It was just like, he'd said it, didn't apologize, no one cares. That's the reality of it. And that's amongst this industry where everybody's very much aware, like in most of the creative industries now. So, and I think the sting for me is that, as opposed to publishing or television or really whatever, is the whole thing about comics is that we're meant to be somewhat truth tellers. That there is a bravery to the medium, and a sort of because it isn't about someone at a desk trying to keep their job like it is for commissioners or for the other levels of parts of the creative industries. It's there's a more leeway, and there's more leeway for bravery. And so to see the majority of comics not engage with this, put their fingers in their ears, actively double down and go for it, or just stay out of it, and the very few people who actually took a stand and were like, Hal Crittenden, Mitch Benn, Shappy. There are a few people comic who actually were like, wait a minute, this is messed up, and this is hypocritical, and this does need to be looked at. Very, very few. And much more so people who were just like out and out. I mean, I got like, not death threats from comics, but I got threats to like be beaten up. I got like, it was insane, the abuse. And but like I say, it was so depressing around 2019 because when it was like election time, and I sort of engaged with people much more, and the stuff that people were putting on Facebook, comedians that I knew or we'd been open spots together or whatever it was, and just to see from like these vile far left blogs, and just knowing the stuff so inside out, and knowing how it's lies. And then, of course, because the algorithms, they do their thing, and suddenly you're brought up. And so it was never ending. And it was and I would pretty much be on sort of 10, 15 different threads at the same time, having people attacking me. It was bonkers. So when the election happened, at the end of the election, I was basically burnt out about the whole matter, and frazzled, and feeling very sore about it all. Relieved. Even on the day and morning of the results, a comic came online. Again, not a famous comic, but a comic came online and sort of was like, assuming everyone was, and said, "Oh, look, all the racists have voted in." And I said, "Well, Jews are very relieved by this." And this guy basically went out and just blocked all the Jewish people he knew, all the Jewish comics, Bennett, Aaron, blocked all of us. And I've lost some very good friends. Weirdly enough, there's every year that there hasn't been for the last year or two, a comedian's Christmas party. Usually it's like January, and we missed it. They're organising one now for it, and it's for regular comics. A few famous comics will turn up, but it's mostly. And I'm going to go, but I'm a little bit dreading it, to be honest. I'm a bit scared. Things got very heated with a lot of people, and I'm still, like I say, I'm a little bit sore about the whole thing. I'm sore to the comedians, people who I thought would take a stand, who didn't. And like I say, I see a lot of it as cowardice and whatnot. And I do get that people might feel out of their. It's a lot. Anti-Semitism in particular is because it's so hard to really get to grips with. I think that's part of the problem. It's a lot to really understand it, and people will just want to make it like, oh, it's anti-Israel or whatever, and just that's the easier way. There's a comfort from being on the left, and I know that as someone who, as a left-wing person, even though left-wing people wouldn't, there are far left people wouldn't consider me left-wing, that there is a comfort that comes from just feeling like you are part of the community of the good. And it really, what it means is you don't have to, if you're the good, you just don't need to challenge, then everybody else is the bad. You don't need to read up on any of the stuff. You don't need to understand it. If everybody who isn't you is bad. And so I get, and I'm going to be a hypocrite myself, because to what level, if a issue doesn't directly involve me, to what level have I gone along with that narrative? Like, okay. And so the interesting thing, I guess, is that this has somewhat politically awoken me out of my complacency. Um, but I do think there is a problem, a larger problem on the left, of just wanting the warmness of feeling like you're a good person, and on the right side of history, without actually putting any work in to see if that position is justified. And that spreads into other issues as well, which is where is, funnily enough, taken me onto like GB News and part of the journey. But it started with the anti-Semitism, and to actually see, contrary to what Corbynites or whatever believe, actually seeing how the papers were presenting the anti-Semitic crisis or not presenting it. And I'm a bit lazy, so I am somewhat resentful that, having had my eyes open, or as like incels or whoever, what do they? I think they call it red pilling, or like the
Yeah.
Matrix. I don't want. I'm very happy to just have my fake steak and
Yeah.
live in that I don't really want to have to start reading books about all this and really getting to grips with various different um, topics. But hypocritically, because anti-Semitism affected me and affected my family directly, and affected and even the area that I live in. I live in Crouch End. It's all very what you'd imagine it to be, sort of North London, very Labour dominates and whatever. And the even like neighbors, like because I joined the Lib Dems because I thought that was like the only way I could really fight back, at least in this area. And then like I had my neighbors like trying to tear down my sign at 2 a.m, my Lib Dem sign. I had people like
What?
chasing me in the street for like leafleting them with a Lib Dem, that and just a neighbor and people who were like really close friends with the kids and stuff, sort of being a bit arsy about this stuff. Oh, it's all being dismissive, and you're like, and just that. So you really get this sort of bunker mentality. The funny thing, and this is interesting, is I think is that my kids, like I say, they go to a Jewish school. The interesting thing was, at the school gates, because so many of the parents there are so much more embedded in the Jewish community. They actually don't. I don't think they really got what was going on, or they had the privilege of not really having to engage with it, because all of their friends were Jewish. A lot of people, not everyone, but a good chunk of them are still hanging out with mates from that they went to camps with when they were 13 and all that stuff. That's their friends. Whereas, of course, I've got my mates from where I live, which isn't that part of London necessarily. I've got my friends from work, from different careers I've had in various parts of the media over the years. So my algorithm, what's coming up is much more indicative of what was really going on. So it was slightly weird that some of my Jewish friends or Jewish parents, I don't think really, at least not until late in the day anyway, really got how bad it was out there, because all their algorithms were just bringing up other Jewish people. So they're not seeing like articles posted from blogs that also post like Holocaust denial and other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's tough when it's your friends, when it's like comedians, your colleagues, because there is that sense of betrayal. And I think a lot of people at that time can relate to that sense of betrayal. And without naming names, I have noticed that there are household name comedians who still take to Twitter to say that anti-Semitism was just a smear campaign to take down Corbyn. I've also noticed comedians who have said, "Oh, I have a lot of learning to do," which is very admirable. As someone who is in the comedy industry, I want to ask, what where have you noticed most comedians fall? Have you noticed most comedians any apologies given to you and other Jewish comedians?
No, not at
No.
all. No. I really thought when the EHRC dropped its findings and found that Labour had broken the law and everything was vindicated, I really thought there were some people, like good friends of mine, who I'd stopped being part of my life, would go, "I'm sorry." But at that point, they've doubled down, unfortunately, and that's very sad. But that's the way it is. I've lost friends, but I've made new friends, and building an online and an online group of friends, but yeah, it's amazing. It's still going on. It's the cognitive dissonance necessary to kind of to double triple down is kind of amazing. But it comes from an ego place of not wanting to just accept any culpability or responsibility. So yeah, and the question is, how forgiving am I? If those people came back now, would I be? I honestly don't know. A part of me would be relieved, I guess, as well. Like, but yeah, it was very overwhelming in terms of just how outnumbered.
Yeah,
we were. But Jews are vocal and we're organized and we are a community, and that's the difference. Is look, people think it's like Jews running the world. No, it's just like we but through the nature of our travels across the world in the last few thousand years, Jews know how to organize. We know how to stay together as a community. We know how to support each other as a community. You're working for the CIA, which is people, Jews, we donate our money to our organizations that help support us. My son goes to JFS, my eldest. That is partly supported. Yeah, it's partly supported by if I became a multi-millionaire, I would give more money to those places, those institutions, because they support all of us, and there's not many of us. So it's not that Jews run the world or whatever, but we are good at getting together and organizing and using what collective strength we have. We're good at marshalling our assets, I guess. But then of course people see those results and see that and think, oh well, then the Jews because they've managed to start out an awareness campaign or whatever it is. But the reality is that's what it takes.
Josh, I want to ask you, for all the young Jewish comedians out there today who may want to talk about anti-Semitism either in their act or off stage on social media, but they might feel nervous about it, what is your advice to them?
Well, to all three of them, I would say there's not. I don't know if there's that many of them out there, but not just to comedians, to anybody. It's so important because just even start off with just liking some stuff and then chuck in a retweet or two, and that's a massive part of it. But the more voices that are added to it, the more it becomes a rolling rock down a hill type thing. Bravery speaks to bravery. That's not my quote, but that is true. And you see people doing it, and you just have to stand up for what you know. If you see lies out there, you have to take a stand. You can't let these things just exist. Even if a lie has got their 100,000 likes and whatever, just you going in and stating the truth, or you liking the thing that's got 5 likes, it helps for your own self worth, for your own sanity almost. It's like you just have to say stuff that you know to be true. In terms of your art, I don't think though that people are that bothered or that engaged. When I say like the general and public, if you went into it and really started trying to dissect the stuff, I just don't think that it's that interesting for a lot of people, or they don't really want to. And also, it's very complicated. And there are people out there who do shows about this stuff, but I imagine a good chunk of it are people who are Jewish and are already engaged in this, or even non-Jews who are engaged in this. But I used to talk about being Jewish on stage, really, from when I started as a comic. Then, as I had kids, I started talking more about the kids and stuff. I guess do I talk about the Jewish stuff? I do talk about the Jewish stuff now more so because it. But I just don't. I don't know what I'd say to new Jewish acts. I just hope I hope that more and more Jews are, and I feel like that if there was one positive of this is that more Jews are engaged in and being proud of their tribe, and that's the pretty much the only sort of silver lining of it, is it forces you to take a stand in a lot of ways. And that, me wearing a Star of David, I used to wear one when I was like 18, but I bought one recently. I went out and bought one because stuff has to be challenged. And but I saw something about some guy getting spat out of the street, because wearing Star of David. And I'm like, we shouldn't live in a society where that's in any way acceptable. So I was like, I'm going to wear this, and I'm going to wear it out, and no one spat at me in the street. There's been a few weird I know sometimes after the fact I forget it's like out or whatever, but it's almost quite an aggressive action. And I feel like we have to, in this era of identity politics as well, it's sort of somewhat forced Jews to say, I count, we count. And that's the flip side of it, is that there's more of us doing that, and not being apologetic about it, which I think certainly is a much more British way of it being. Was like, to be honest, this whole thing is like, I feel like as a community we would be very, very happy just going back, and just this whole thing hadn't happened, and that's the comfort zone. That's been really the blessing for 60 years of British Jewry also, is that we've been able to just get on with our lives and not be pulled. But this really forced us to stop being complacent, and there was a complacency there as well. And Americans are sort of finding this out for themselves. And it's interesting to see the lessons. This is like the one time that we were ahead of the game instead of America, was Jews fighting back in this country, and a lot of those people, Eve Barley, who's Scottish, taking that fight in America as well. And I feel like it's weird. I belong to this America. I did this like creative thing in America, so it was like a thing of Jews who I was like on this mailing list with them, and so they were all American Jews, and there was like a couple of English Jews, British Jews, and so I'd see someone put up a thing like, America's bonkers, like they're getting it now. They're getting it, and now people are taking a stand. But this has been rumbling for a good few years, so it's amazing to see some of the people now, but very few, and now more and more so. Because there are a lot of Jewish celebrities, like there are a lot of every different ethnicity celebrities, but they've been very quiet about a lot of this stuff. And now finally it's reaching some point. It's sad that it's got to this point. It's sad that in America, the hate crime against Jews is the largest, religious-wise against Jewish people, and just numbers and people being beaten up the street. Just before this, I was just on Twitter, saw some guy being attacked on the tube. It's, when you look at the numbers, it's quite scary, and it's a hard thing to fight online. I don't feel like someone said, the genie's out of the bottle, and you either fight the genie or it ain't going back. Like, and so you can take a stand and try and make a difference, and maybe there's a Sisyphean element to it, and maybe things will just go back. Like, it almost feels like the best case scenario, things will just go back to the mild underlying anti-Semitism that exists.
Yeah.
Then that would be the best case scenario, is like people are just kind of anti-Semitic and in with the occasional offhand joke and whatever. That would be that feels like that's that would be nice somehow, which is mad.
Josh, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Before we wrap up, please tell the listeners, what have you got going on and where can people find you?
Well, yeah, follow me on Twitter. What is it? Josh X Howie on Twitter. I'm gigging. They can sign up to my newsletter, which I sent one newsletter from my website about 4 years ago. So maybe in another 3 or 4 years they'll get another one. I'm not a great hustler in that way. So I am gigging. Always welcome to come see a gig. And the other thing is, I'm on GB News a couple of nights a week, doing this show called Headliners. It's comics going through the newspapers. I love it. I love arguing, and I love having a voice. People don't agree with me a lot of the things, but I think it's important to be on there. There's, the point is to have plurality of voices, and to then be able to have a laugh about it and be respectful about it and be challenged, to challenge people and to be challenged. And GB News gets a lot of flack, and I think at its best it really does widen the conversation, which is the remit. And I think it's a great show. So please, check that out.
All right. Josh Howie, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Against Antisemitism.
Absolute pleasure. Sorry about the thousands of kids coming in and out.
Don't worry.